Kia ora, I'm Chris. I'm part of the user experience team at Air New Zealand. We work on a lot of the digital properties that all of you probably know and work on a lot of things that probably a lot of you never actually see. We're always tasked with solving design problems that apply in a lot of diverse places. So it may be in the airports, much like Yvonne was sort of showing up, and for customer pains in sort of real life in our call centers. It's a really exciting set of challenges for thinking about how we can actually design better, and it's incredibly hard when you're working on something that everyone in New Zealand has a very strong opinion on. But what I'm focused on today is like the idea of this sort of treadmill. Like one of the things that I found when I moved from a sort of design studio to an internal team was like, it just never finished. Like there was always going to be a next deliverable. It was like the marathon that never finished. And when you're sort of doing this sort of marathon, you don't actually know where you're actually going. You never really know if you're making the right decision. And you never really know if you're sort of actually heading in the right direction. So similar to what Eric was sort of talking about. You know, and that idea of digital just means done never really feels done. You know, there's always a next sort of design sprint. There's always a next feature on the roadmap. There's always like a card moving to the next sort of column. You know, like it's that sense of pace where you're just kind of like delivering. And coming from a sort of design studio, you kind of feel like sometimes you want to sort of ask the right sort of problems. How can you actually sort of slow down that level of deployment, but without burning all your bridges? Figuring out what the sort of right sort of questions are, how you can actually improve the sort of products rather than just actually build a better widget or shine up a new sort of button, you know, because us UX designers, all we do is sort of like color in, use some crayons, you know, and also thinking about how all of these products work together. Like we have people that love our products, love our mobile app, but you know, moving from buying a ticket to the mobile phone to being on the plane and the frustration of the real world that comes in between all of those sort of parts, that's what we've been sort of thinking about quite a lot in terms of how to actually sort of map that into a singular vision. So, you know, inserting design can sometimes feel like a bit of a poor second cousin. You know, and there's no sort of right way to actually sort of put design into the process. Luke was sort of touching on it this morning, you know, I'll just send me an Envision link and we'll be done with it. You know, a lot of our sort of focus is actually on figuring out how to actually insert opportunities to stop and actually pause, reflect, and think. And often it's all about sort of asking a question. You know, like those questions are a great way of actually considering those what-if moments. And, you know, when you're on the delivery treadmill, it just keeps on, like the questions, the product manager doesn't want to know. You know, the developers don't want to know. Everyone, like, it's like, no, you're slowing stuff down. You know, but asking a question is actually really important. Do our customers really want this? Is it actually going to make their lives easier? Is there actually any magic? Because it's really easy to deliver something that has no romance in it, you know, pure function, gets you through the sort of the checkout process, gets you through well, it's not so easy to get you through the airport, unfortunately, but you know, all of those sort of things, asking the questions are really important as part of what we're actually sort of doing. And so asking ourselves, where are we going? You know, like sometimes you actually need to sort of slow down, and slow down sort of means that we're actually thinking long term. We have projects that are anywhere from 2 weeks to around sort of 10 years. So something that goes on the plane, 10 years time. Something that goes in the sort of the booking engine, you can probably get it in hopefully within about sort of a month, most likely within 6 months. Who knows? Depends on who you're actually sort of talking to. But, you know, considering that idea of what the vision actually is rather than just actually the relentless delivery. we're sort of balancing what the idea of the future is, rather than actually, and then sort of considering what actually needs to be done to get there. And we've been thinking about it in terms of the way of thinking of it as a treadmill. And we kind of need to sort of slow down that sort of pace of the treadmill. And treadmills are sort of weird things. Like we've got all of the sort of the 80s style spandex kind of idea of what the sort of the treadmills, but that's only really in the sort of last 50 years. And even, the internet hasn't really helped. Like some of the most sort of popular treadmill videos are either the guy that's sort of dancing along to Uptown Funk that was on Ellen, or the OK Go guys, whoever sort of really knew. But treadmills are actually kind of have a really sort of interesting sort of history. Like they've been a sort of method of production for a very long time. Turning gears, pumping water, milling grains. Treadmills were actually a cross between a stair climber and what we think of a modern treadmill, which, to be fair, probably makes sense in a gym. But treadmills were actually all about punishment. The idea was actually idleness was the enemy of useful work. Prisoners would be on a treadmill probably about 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, so a 30-hour working week. I'm not going to sort of say anything, but we're not near, we work in sort of the digital space, so it's nowhere near that level of sort of brutal punishment, but similarities. There's really sort of useful stuff about the treadmill. Like, it allows us to sort of continually go forward, but figuring out how to actually sort of slow down that treadmill in order to make us think and consider where we're actually going is a sort of really important part. So we decided to sort of frame this as a bit of a sort of design problem, asking the question of how many products do we actively need to be sort of involved in? At Air New Zealand, you can probably be, you probably couldn't even, like the amount of products that you're dealing with, outnumber about 200. So trying to actually balance your input on all of those sort of things is incredibly hard. What parts of the process can we actually, focus on, buy ourselves some time to think? Can we get sort of like product teams to actually build sort of empathy with who they're actually sort of building for? Can we actually set up systems so we don't actually need to sort of be involved as much? Or do we actually just need to sort of like call no, like put a pause on the actual sort of delivery? And, it's a big organization, and we kind of need to apply it to the way that we already work. We're incredibly lucky in order to be able to tackle a lot of really interesting problems, some huge, some take a long time to sort of realize, others a bit more sort of tactical. But, figuring out how to sort of step back from that delivery mode is, and to the point of actually dreaming is something that our team's sort of been really sort of focused on. And not just about the sort of digital side of things, where digital and physical kind of have the sort of crossovers. How do you rethink the role of an in-flight entertainment system where most people are now using Netflix, YouTube, all of those sort of things? You have a mobile app that is kind of getting long in the tooth. People love it. You know that you need to make a new one, but no one thinks anything's wrong with it. And we're going through the process of turning on Wi-Fi on our planes. What happens when the experience of the plane means that you are still now connected to the internet? Like, these are all sort of really big sort of problems that we are sort of tackling. And they all sort of come back to this idea of the sort of product vision. They're large questions. They're hard to answer. But there's a real sort of, all of these questions take a lot of time to actually sort of answer, and buying us time as a design team as a whole to sort of consider and think what the future actually is. And we work with partners, we work with internally, we've got a lot of sort of great people that we actually sort of work with. And we're actually starting to see this sort of translation of those sort of results now. The delivery of the treadmill allows us dreamers to keep on track, because otherwise you just sort of go off into the wilderness. But we need to sort of figure out whether we're sort of running before we actually know where we're sort of going. And dreaming about the future, especially in travel, has a sort of very long history. This is a view of the future airport from 1958. This is the Expanding Airport by Charles and Ray Eames, which is part of a 10-minute pitch to illustrate what the concept was of Washington International Airport. This was the very first airport in the USA that was designed to accommodate jet aircraft. So Saranan, the architect, believed that passenger experience was incredibly average, mainly because you had to walk a lot. His solution was to actually make cocktail lounges that transported you from the airport terminal to the planes. But one of those sort of funny things from, those visions from the past, apart from the questionable gender norms, like they always start to sort of reflect that sort of near future, not the actual sort of far future. In 1958, we didn't have airport security. Jets were new. We didn't actually have the amount of people that are traveling. Visions are actually just that. Like, they're glimpses of what we're actually sort of thinking about. We don't expect them to have all the answers. We don't sort of probe against them a lot. But they help us to sort of ask those sort of really interesting sort of what-if questions and build what we think that the future may sort of come. And looking in the rearview mirror, it's always going to be a bit questionable, but that's kind of where we're sort of at. And where we're at in terms of sort of product visions now, they kind of turn into advertising, And this is a sort of really good example of, the product vision where everything's actually sort of perfect. Check-in goes without a hitch, your plane isn't delayed, you can order a coffee, you actually get there on time, all of those, you're not held up in the sort of the TSA. And you can sort of see the promise of what the romance of what the future of travel was. There's similarities to the idea of 1958, but, it's still got that level of optimism, which is what sort of design brings to us. And that's the vision that we actually need to sort of know in order to know where we're going. That dream, it's important that we sort of consider both good and bad for our customer and how it all sort of works. But, that treadmill helps to get you there. But when you're on the treadmill, you can't actually sort of dream about those sort of future things. So what we've actually been sort of looking at is what the treadmill actually sort of buys us. And what the treadmill actually buys us is speed. So we've been experimenting with different ways of actually how to deal with the treadmill. And there's been a couple of ways to buy us time. There's the simple sort of things like working with our software engineers in order to build stuff in smarter sort of ways. So our products now many of our products have sort of shared technology, so we don't have to build the same thing 200 different times, because it's really hard to build the same button 200 different times. And we've got this sort of idea of that design system that works across everything. We're building sort of parts of the Lego that are actually going together to help us to actually build stuff faster, because that actually buys us time. All of this stuff is actually sort of normal and it ain't sort of rocket science. And that actually buys us the ability to slow down, the time to sort of make us think, consider, and step away from all of those sort of deliveries. And we've had to work hard to remove ourselves from the process in some places. And we only bought ourselves some time on certain products to think about what the sort of future could actually hold. And thinking about what the sort of the treadmill is you get on the treadmill, but you never know where you're actually sort of going. And figuring out that sort of direction still comes down to that idea of time. And thinking about how you actually sort of, what the future is, you sort of start to ask yourself, how do you design that sort of future? And it's something that we're sort of focused on quite a lot. That D word, design. Whatever sort of discipline you're in, there's a shared understanding of what design is. There's some vastly different ones as well. But the great thing about design is that it's inherently optimistic, and it actually sets us up the ability to start thinking about what the sort of future is. And that allows us to sort of rethink the way that we're sort of doing stuff. Introducing new rituals that remind us of these visions, changing the way that we already work in order to actually insert some time before the next deliverable. And, there's a few sort of things that I'd like to reflect on that we've sort of found successful in our sort of journey. So context, like making sense of the problem. We're always trying to sort of understand where things are. Understanding where the problem is incredibly hard, especially when you're working in such huge sort of systems. You spend a lot of time poking, probing, and you don't always know the right questions to sort of ask, and you need to sort of earn the trust to actually allow to be asked those sort of questions. And this actually goes back to Eliel Saarinen, who was the architect of the Washington Airport vision. He focused on the idea of context, the idea of a chair within a room within a house within an environment, and an environment within a city. Architecture and user experience actually share quite a lot of those same considerations in the similar common history. How can we actually sort of consider all of those things as the way that they all sort of intersect? It's a way that we can actually sort of understand everything's place within a giant sort of ecosystem. And it's no secret that we have a lot of data from our call center, data on performance, past data. We've even got a bot that we sort of capture a lot of sort of conversations with. But data doesn't actually tell you real human stories. And it's very, very hard to sort of understand that something that's so black and white actually covers a lot of grey. And that grey are actually all of our sort of human stories that we're sort of dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So how can we actually sort of understand how people sort of work? And proximity, understanding that grey, designing, co-creation, whatever you want to call it. We bring more customers into the product design process. We do we've got a weekly user testing session where we've got customers testing everything from our website, our booking engine, in-flight entertainment, mobile app, you name it, it's being tested. But that, like bringing the sort of users in for the user testing allows us to be a bridge. The bridge between sort of design, product design, data, all of those sort of things. It's easy to sort of find simple sort of pain points, and it helps inform all of those sort of visions. It's an easy way that we actually find insights that are both small and large, and we sort of bring those in front of more people, because it's incredibly easy to forget that there's another person on the other side of the glowing rectangle. But one of the sort of other things that we found is that sharing. It's very easy for someone to actually capture insights, but if you're not actually sharing that sort of stuff, it's not all that useful. And we love to have sort of product managers, flight attendants, etc., attend user testing sessions, but it's not always sort of possible depending on where we're testing in the world, what we're testing, what stage the thing that we're testing is, whether it's an early concept or a later concept. Sometimes people are just busy. So we spend a lot of time actually talking, sharing insights, sometimes even matching like one problem in one product to another problem. And it's incredibly hilarious because most of the time we're the spotter. Like we actually see this sort of problem rather than actually the product manager, because they don't talk a lot. And those ways of communicating those insights are actually what we're sort of incredibly focused on. And they are shared across all of the sort of products, all the product managers. And now that we've started to see sort of great success, that's actually what sort of brought us the sort of next stage. Because what we are actually after is getting the idea of time. You know, thinking about that sort of product treadmill is for us to actually grab time, slow down to think about those sort of problems as some of the biggest challenges that we actually face. You know, as a design team, the question that we're asked a lot is about velocity, you know, how we're actually going to deliver. You know, moving fast will actually help us deliver, but this only works when you actually have a sense of purpose. And in order for us to actually have that purpose, we've been starting to earn that trust in order to slow down. You know, creating design intentionally for our users, which means that we actually get sort of focus, attention, and work. And so those are the ways that we've actually been building with trust with our product teams. Buy us time, imagine those visions for the future. Starting to get a balance between the sort of the plod and the run. Sometimes we're running, sometimes we're walking, but we're always sort of learning. And, you know, we have the ability to actually think about the sort of the good and the bad, and not this one, and not this one. But we're sort of moving from that idea of just delivery to something that we're a bit more sort of comfortable with. You know, think, design, test. It buys us the time to consider and learn before we break up for that delivery treadmill to make sure that we hit all of those hard and fast deadlines. And we're starting to see the change in the work that we're doing. If you fly in Trans-Tasman over the coming months, you'll start to see the changes in the in-flight entertainment with some of the help with some of the people in this room. Thank you.